Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see everybody. I know more people will be coming in. Today is Sunday, October 30th. I should at least know the date. And we are just so happy to welcome Bruce Spear. He's the public education manager at Hazone. He's going to tell you more about Hazone and how to join and get more information from them. And and he directs the development of public education programs that challenge and support Jewish institutions to develop and integrate commitments to addressing the climate crisis. Oh, Bruce, we should tell you, every Friday night we have a prayer for our climate, which I know is a spiritual way to look at this, but it brings it to everyone's consciousness. Bruce brings 10 years of experience working in urban agriculture, community composting, and public horticulture. Additionally, he has worked in nonprofit strategic planning and leadership development. He holds a master's degree from NYU in environmental conservation education, focusing on nonprofit management. Oh, he is an amateur naturalist and lover of composting and an avid fermenter of food and drink. Oh, you might have to get to that at the end of what you're exactly fermenting. We would probably love to hear that. So with no further ado, Bruce.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just gonna switch my screen to gallery so I can see everyone's faces and names just so I know who's in the virtual room. Thank you all for inviting me. It's really, really lovely to be here. Um, I think Vanessa hit all of the key points. One of the things that's interesting and reminds me I need to change some of my information on our website.
Yeah.
I have a new title, and it's program manager for climate action. And the reason why I share that explicitly is it really shares kind of a change of our perspective and really feels like an inflection point where we are in the world, right? So um, today I'm going to be talking about a new program, a new network that's being launched by Hazon in partnership with a lot of people called the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. So I'll go through a presentation, but part of it will be, yes, this is a program, and I'd love to inspire you all to join. But the other is I want to use it as a way in for us to have a conversation about what's our relationship with the climate crisis. Like, what does it mean to take action on what might be the biggest challenge humanity has collectively faced? Um, One of the conversations we often have in my house, because my partner's like a psychology geek, uh, our brains were not set up to deal with these kinds of crises, right? And so all the feelings, all the action, inaction, ways of relating to it is completely understandable because we quite literally weren't built this way. So I've personally dedicated my life just because very deeply inspires me to feel connected to the natural world to kind of take care of, find ways to resolve environmental crises, um, and find ways for us to deeply connect with it, both on that spiritual level, but also just to take action, which is just a real challenge. So I encourage everyone that as we go through, there'll be a presentation, but then we'll have a lot of space for open conversation. Um, who am I bringing? Like what's in my head? But also, I'm going to be addressing you not as where we are 25 people on the screen, not as 25 individuals, but here we're actually here as a collective, as a part of a synagogue community. And those are two different entities. So today I want to talk to the entity of your synagogue community of which you are all parts, um, because that has a unique role. And that's often a conversation we don't uplift. We often so much put the focus on ourselves as individuals. What can I do to make a difference my own little way? But there's so much power in collective action. Um, there's so much support, hope, possibility when we kind of come together. So today I'm gonna have us try to think from that perspective. So I'll be sharing a presentation for a little bit, and there'll be moments where I see share some things in the chat, and I don't always have immediate access to the chat while I have my shared screen. So if I miss something, please bring it back up, and we'll bring it back up in conversation.
Yeah, I monitor the chat. And speaking of that, I'm going to put in the chat Hazon. So you can click on that and find out more about this fabulous organization.
Amazing. Great. Okay. So, like I said, I'm going to be talking about a major new coalition that we've launched fairly recently, September 15th, not too long ago, called the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. So I have three intentions in at least this segment, and then we might take our conversation and really whatever feels alive for the room. One is to ground us in the reality of the climate crisis. Two is to share what I experience as hope, possibility, and opportunity emerging for the Jewish community to collectively make a big difference. And three, for you all to consider joining us as an expression of your own work, commitment, and values that you're already putting in place from what I've heard, even just chatting with Vanessa and Jay beforehand. So after the more formal presentation, we'll have an open discussion, and we have different ways of talking about this. And what's fun for me is I'm often giving this presentation and this conversation to many people across North America that are in different locations, different communities. So I never get to have a really specific conversation about what it's like in your context. I want to hear what it feels like how this really lands in your specific place in Chicagoland, right? Like I don't get to have that conversation often, and it's really powerful because the climate crisis is affecting us right here, right now, in the places that we live. So as I get through this next conversation, I'd love for you to put in the chat your name and just what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear the phrase climate crisis? Like a Rorschach test. Don't think, whatever's the first thing that comes to your mind, word or phrase, just put it in the chat. Fresh water. Love it. Opportunity. Jay, very cool. Fear, Amy, thank you. How will leave the world for our grandchildren? Keep adding those. Now, that's a really interesting, it's real and important. I even like the very first few because there was such a range of foci, right? Like someone's like the very real practical resource. How am I going to have enough water? But then there were even some like possibility, fear, like all these things. And I know for me, I'm bringing a different person to the party every day when I think about this. Like wherever I'm at that day, there's kind of like a different reaction. So again, just think about that. And my hope is that we come out of here feeling a bit more hope and possibility. So I'll share a bit about what's involved in joining the coalition, some of the resources that once you do join, but really the role that we'd like to empower you to play. So it's really it. And one thing I want to ground us in, so we're just past, I don't know if you heard, but there were a lot of holidays recently. So Hyman just passed them. We're coming out of the Shemitah year, so the seventh year of rest in the Jewish agricultural calendar, which I find a very powerful way to kind of frame all of my, like our life, right? Like where am I going to be next Shemitah year, 7 years from now? And one of the things that comes up in the Torah is this idea of Hakel, that at the end of the Shemitah year, at the very beginning of the 8th year, the next year, we actually gather all of the people of Israel to hear a reading from the king. And one of the things that's interesting is that it's kind of a way to separate out everything from the past 7 years. It's like this moment of like, what have we learned? How do we gather everyone together? And how do we look forward with a new vision? It's like at the end of Shabbat, we do a Havdalah, where, make blessings over the spices, the wine, the flame. And it's like, okay, now we're ready to move into a new week. Similarly, there's this idea that if we gather the whole nation together, we get to make a separation, a ritual Havdalah between the last 7 years and looking forward together. Where do we want to be? So there's a very unique energy in this moment in a ritual, spiritual way that we get to think about, okay, everything I've learned in the last year, 7 years, decade, whatever it is, we can make a separation as a community and think forward where we want to be. and probably nothing more than the climate crisis will very much shape the next 7 years and beyond of our life. So why Jewish climate action, right? Why, as a shoal, should you think about or organize around climate change? So I'll start by naming a few of the realities of the climate crisis and what climate change means for Earth and its inhabitants now and in the future. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change represents the best thinking of thousands of climate scientists from across the world. So the finding of the IPCC's most recent report from this past spring and summer are clear. Climate change is human-induced and is caused by burning fossil fuels. The IPCC makes abundantly clear in the reports that we need to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and more importantly, make significant reductions by 2030 to avoid the worst case scenarios of what climate crisis can mean for our planet. Climate change causes dangerous and widespread disruption and is already affecting the lives of every person on this planet. It's no longer just out there, it's now here where we live. A third of the people living in the United States were affected by a climate-related disaster just last summer. And I wonder if there's anything that comes to mind of how the climate crisis has specifically affected your area the last year. I know we've had a historic drought here in the Northeast, which is pretty uncommon for where we are. We don't really frequently get droughts. So I'd love to hear how it's actually landing back where you are. And you know, for those of us that have a connection to the land of Israel as a part of our Jewish identity, Israel stands to be particularly hit hard by the impacts of climate change, including imperiling the region's fresh water and the potential to further destabilize the region as a result of that. And what's also lovely is that the government of Israel is one of the founding partners of this coalition. So climate change is also known as a threat multiplier. So for every organization that you already care about, every issue that you already care about as an organization, so maybe it's food insecurity or homelessness or racial injustice, climate change exacerbates that issue. And it puts our families, our elderly, and the most vulnerable that are already at risk, at further risk.
Michael said in the chat, nicer weather, we will be the recipients of climate refugees. And Merle said much broader recycling opportunities compared to our current limited recycling. And I would add that living in the Midwest where we haven't had a drought and we don't have hurricanes. Yes, we have tornadoes, but you know, I look at the coast and I look at what's happening, whether it be fires or hurricanes or even more tornadoes. And I think that's absolutely due to climate change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I also appreciate someone put climate refugees in there. Because no matter where we are, right, like we end up being our brother's keeper, to be timely, to quote our recent Parsha from the Torah reading. Right, it ultimately, as the world starts shifting around because other people are affected more severely, we start finding people need help in our backyards. Which really leads to the last point, is that those least responsible and least able to cope with the impacts of climate change are the hardest hit. So actually, the less developed countries of the world, the less enabled of our communities have the least resources to actually deal with it, but tend to be in areas that are experiencing bigger challenges. So while reducing the Jewish community's greenhouse gas emissions alone will not save the world, our community's collective action can be extremely significant. So to put things in perspective, if the North American Jewish community were a country, we'd be emitting more than 162 other countries across the world. And a lot of that has to do with our relative position because we are in a well-developed country. The resources we use per capita are far more than the rest of the world. So we are not a small slice in the pie. Relative to the rest of the world, we are quite a big slice. So we must mobilize the collective power and resources of Jewish communities and commit to climate action. So the good news is that we have the knowledge, we have the technology, and we have the tools necessary to take action. So to give 3 examples of what we're already seeing happening in the Jewish community, the Associated, which is the Baltimore Jewish Federation, as of this summer, is now powering 50% of their operations through solar, and that's the picture on the left. In the center is the Jewish Family Services in Vancouver. They just opened a new food hub, and that's now serving 100% vegetarian kosher food which we could talk about how that relates to reducing greenhouse gas emissions later. And then on the right is Congregation Cole Emmett in California, and they recently designed and built a net zero energy and zero waste synagogue facility. Taking climate action not only helps to mitigate the climate crisis, it also brings our organizations significant benefits, such as cost savings and meaningful engagement opportunities for community members of all ages. And for over 20 years, Chazon has been a leader in the growing field of Jewish environmental education. So we know from experience, and it's been confirmed by studies, that engaging in food, farming, outdoor, and environmental education from a Jewish perspective is a really powerful way to reach Jews from across the spectrum and builds a vibrant community. And while the climate crisis is an important issue for Jews of all ages, for 67% of Gen Z youth and 71% of millennials, climate is a top priority. Young people today feel more deeply than anyone else that if we fail to take significant action now, the world will be passing forward to our children and grandchildren will be far more unstable for Jewish and human life than the world today. So committing to climate action is a powerful way to demonstrate to our young people that our organizations, our shuls, acknowledge and are responding to their concerns. And taking climate action is deeply aligned with Jewish wisdom and values. So in Kohelet Rabbah, Ecclesiastes, the Midrash, we read that upon finishing the creative process, God leads the first human around the Garden of Eden and says, "Be careful not to despoil or destroy my world. If you ruin it, there's no one to repair it after you." So the climate crisis really is a historic inflection point for our planet, our communities, and our people, and Jewish tradition compels us to respond. So what we do today matters. Our actions today will ripple forward in time, and it's our responsibility to face the crisis with full energy, resiliency, and the resources of the Jewish community. So now is a moment of opportunity for us as an entire Jewish community to leverage our collective resources and commit to meaningful, scalable climate action. And we understand that for many organizations, I'd be interested in hearing from you all later in the discussion, the barrier to taking climate action is not necessarily understanding why it's vitally important for us to acknowledge to respond to climate change, but rather how. And that's one of the reasons why I asked to begin, like what comes up? Many of us are often paralyzed by overwhelming confusion at the prospect of taking action. And that's why we formed the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition to really help get past that barrier. So this is a coalition powered by Chazon, and this is our mission up on the screen. So the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition is a network of Jewish community organizations that all recognize the existential threat and moral urgency of the climate crisis and committed to taking climate action. And I'll add here that this is a collective of people that are acknowledging this is a real problem, right? This is everyone who's already on the bus of that this is a problem that we must address. The coalition is the largest communal effort that the Jewish community has ever seen to mobilize a collective response to the climate crisis. So the coalition's bringing together Jewish organizations from across North America. So I'm talking to federations, day schools, synagogues of all denominations, camps, hillels, social service agencies, foundations, rabbinicals, JCCs. So really the whole gamut of the Jewish community, and supporting them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and taking climate action at an institutional level. We want to leverage the collective influence and resources of our Jewish community and model scalable climate action that will bring our shared vision of a healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable world for all. So the process actually started back in March 2022, earlier this year. Chazon initiated the coalition's pilot phase along with 20 major umbrella Jewish organizations who joined the coalition's founding partners. So this is really demonstrating broad consensus that the Jewish community is ready and capable of taking climate action. And these organizations are working to mobilize their networks in taking meaningful action around climate. So this is just a logo cloud of everyone that's joined on. And these partners have been meeting every 6 weeks to develop their own climate action plans that will be released this winter. So if you just look on here, there's a number of organizations that just relate to shul life in general, right? We have every denomination represented. We also have the Jewish Federations of North America, Hillels, JCC, so really the whole gamut of Jewish life. And one of the things that I'll talk about later is we also, while we have broad consensus, we also have support in ways that we didn't. We're able to bring together the entire Jewish world to work on the same issue in ways that we just simply couldn't in the past. So the coalition publicly launched on September 15th, and Jewish nonprofit organizations everywhere are invited and encouraged to sign on. So I am talking to you all here, but there is a whole network that you're also part of, and they're also welcome. So what does it mean to join the Climate Leadership Coalition? And as I go through these, I already heard a little bit about what you all have been working on, like the 10 Green Commandments. And this is a conversation in my synagogue of how the commitments here actually change the conversation about climate action. So members of the coalition commit to, so the organization's chief executive, in your case, probably rabbi, signing on to the coalition founding statement, a document which you can find on our website, which I'll link to that at the end, and that acknowledges the existential threats posed by climate crisis and affirms that signatories are committed to taking action. Designating a staff liaison to lead your climate action work, and then developing, implementing, evaluating, and sharing organizational climate action plans annually. And climate action plans detail both the actions taken to date and setting goals for reducing your greenhouse gas emissions in the coming year. And there are no minimum requirements for a climate action plan. Also, there's no cost to join the coalition. The goal is to support a meaningful climate action and make it accessible to Jewish institutions. So we're really just trying to reduce barriers to entry as much as possible.
I always say we want to be a part of something bigger. We're a URJ congregation. We have people in the congregation. You want to be part of something bigger.
Thank you, Vanessa. I love that. So we're actually going to talk about now, like, what are the nuts and bolts of what it means to take climate action in the coalition? And one of our goals was to create a lot of clarity of, like, how do I know when I've arrived, or how do I know that I'm staying on the right path, which is such an important part of just feeling empowered and not having that space of paralysis and overwhelm. So we're also developing resources and partnerships to support people. And we've organized the work into two broad focused areas. So one is getting the organization to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So here specifically, talk about the greenhouse gas emissions associated with your synagogue, not necessarily the greenhouse gas emissions associated with every member of your synagogue, just that produced by your synagogue. And then engaging the broader Jewish community in climate action, which is what we're calling expanding impact. So to focus on getting to zero emissions, we've identified 4 solutions that you can take on that will have you achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So they're sourcing clean electricity, and this could be purchasing clean electricity through the grid or producing your own through solar, going electric. And this really just means making a plan that documents all the non-electric appliances. So let's say gas furnaces, boilers. I know my synagogue is looking to replace a 50-year-old HVAC unit that we know will be going, knowing when they're going to expire and planning for how to replace them with an electric version. Reducing your emissions. So this could be making energy efficiency retrofits, adjusting your food and travel practices, and managing natural resources to sequester carbon through nature-based solutions. And the last, which I hear you're already engaged in, offsetting the emissions you can't reduce. So some greenhouse gas emissions are just unavoidable. It's just a part of functioning. Sometimes there's ways we can't get around it. So for those, we support purchasing vetted greenhouse gas offsets. And these are the areas that we find that Chazon has the greatest number of internal resources to support your organization's climate action. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about that before I close. So talking about expanding impact, so reducing institutional greenhouse gas emissions alone won't get us where we need to be. So the second area of focus is looking at how do we go beyond the walls of our synagogues and engaging in a broader Jewish communal climate action. So for each of the following areas, we have a number of resources and have identified partners who can also support you. So the first is education and nature connection. So engaging communities through programs, celebrations, and learning moments that ground us in our connection with Earth and inspire collective action. So to give some examples of the resources that we have, so there's the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, a program of Chazon that works to engage youth in climate organizing. We have immersive retreat experiences at Isabella Freedman, actually not too far from me, Connecticut, Falls Village, Connecticut, as well as the Pearlstone Retreat Center in Baltimore. But there's also in cities across North America where there's local and regional organizations who specialize in Jewish food, farming, and environmental education that we connect with. And then at Chazon, we also have just a whole robust library of curricular resources that will be available to all coalition members. So there's ways just to build that really positive, heartfelt connection to the natural world. It's also advocating for climate smart policy. So some examples of the partners that we have are Dayenu. They're a national organization that are building a movement of American Jews that are confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. Jewish Earth Alliance, a grassroots network working to engage Jews in policy, and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, who I just spoke about. And then the last is finance. So that's choosing organizational investments, endowments, and banking relationships that are based on their climate impacts. So we're working with Dayenu on this. There's also an organization called J-Lens that explores a Jewish lens on investing and serves as a bridge between the Jewish community and values-based impact investing. And there's also an organization called Faith Invest, and they're a global network that powers faith communities to invest in line with their beliefs and values. So as a response to these feelings of overwhelm that stall and prevent us from taking action, we have a few resources that we'll be providing. So we're creating climate action resource guides, templates, and learning sessions. So they'll focus both on those solutions around getting to zero greenhouse gas emissions, as well as expanding your impact. And we'll have these learning sessions available throughout the year, and there'll be a whole comprehensive set of resource guides that are regularly available on our website. We also have one-on-one consultation and staff office hours. And then the part that I'm really excited about is we're creating communities of practice. So I'm actually going to be working on the synagogue ones. So synagogues from across the denominations will be coming together to work in quarterly meetings to talk about what is working for them because they have a similar structure to you. So we'll actually be breaking out the synagogues based on size, because smaller synagogues tend to have different needs than larger synagogues, whether it's having a building or dealing with a lot of people with food during Kiddush. So you already may know some of the organizations in your community practice, but we'll be workshopping challenges, creating solutions, having some synagogue-specific support there.
Bruce, thanks for all of this. Usually I have everything locked down. I don't know who is using if you could just clear the screen, because
I have that on my second screen.
Yeah. So, and I apologize because obviously we think this is very important.
Yeah.
Okay. And now reshare.
Well, actually,
I'll have to go back and re-lock down my adult enrichment screens so people can't do that. But go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead and share. Hopefully it'll be gone.
Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. Cool. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, 100% better.
Great. Okay, well, the last bit is that we're going to have financial resources in the form of interest-free loans and matching grants. And so this is actually going to help create investment opportunities in the long term to make our institutions more environmentally and financially sustainable. So we're diligently working to raise money for a climate action fund. And that'll be for things like investing solar, retrofitting light bulbs, installing new energy light systems, and more. So just quickly kind of where things are at for us. So registrations open regularly. You can register your organization at hazon.org/coalition, and I'll put that in the chat. Communities of practice and all those resources are going to launch starting in January. The first round of climate action plans that will be available to the public, so you can see what people are up to, will be available this Tu B'Shvat in January, but the first round of new people joining won't be due till the next year, so a full year. So yeah, so that is the timeline. Like I said, this is the website. We're actually really hoping to get a lot of momentum in these first few months. So hey, I'd love for you all to join, and I'd like to see how this landed. What are some questions that came up? And then the second is to spread the word around your community. This is not just going to work if it's us alone, but you know, as we have that ripple effect, we get to build that collective action. And the last is, so a line from the scroll of Esther that we read on Purim. Who knows, you may have been chosen for a time such as this. So as I shared, the climate crisis represents a historic inflection point for our planet, communities, and our people. And Jewish tradition compels us to respond, and each of us can help move the Jewish community towards collective climate action that this moment demands of us. So I'd like to open it up to a more general conversation after this. And there's a few directions that I'm prepared to take it in depending on what feels alive. These are some thoughts that I have, but I'll take this off the screen and can pull them back up. But really, I just want to leave the space for us to chat. Would you hear what sounds exciting? Yeah, the floor's open.
So. Questions, comments? Of course, I'm going to have to, oh, wait, somebody's coming back in. Jay, tell us more about what Macomb is doing. Everybody is on now, and you've really been at the forefront of this as well as in your own personal home.
Sure. So, I think one of the big things that happened in the last 6 months or so is the Inflation Reduction Act passed, which really makes so much of these needed changes that we have to do financially a win. Right. So we don't have to think of this like, well, I'll take a financial hit because it's the right thing to do for the environment. I think a key message to get out now is that the green thing is the cheaper thing in many cases. So in Illinois, we have community solar, which means even if you don't have a roof to call your own, you can still source your electricity from solar fields that are being built all across Illinois. And a guaranteed savings versus buying it from our utilities. So just recently, there are some projects that are coming online that our congregation building would actually qualify for. And that's a relatively new thing. So we've looked at the possibility of getting rooftop solar on the building. Our roof is going to need some work within the next 10 years. So rooftop's not an option for us. But community solar certainly is, which is going to, help get our congregation on its way towards net zero and save us money. And it's something I think that we can all kind of rally upon around, because we could all do this with our own household as well.
Okay, great. Michael Tatel.
Yeah.
I unmuted you. Go. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, a couple things. One is I applaud what your organization is doing, and my concern is it is not nearly doing anything that's going to make too much of a difference. I mean, has someone done the math? If every synagogue in the country went zero, what would that change? Now, and that's not to say that we shouldn't, because every bit matters, and we need awareness, people. But we are in a crisis mode. If we don't triple down on advocacy, vote properly, push our government to surpass the Paris Accords. We are in a world of hurt. I think people aren't aware enough that climate migration is already happening. All our Venezuelan and all the Guatemalan refugees and wherever that are being shipped to Chicago, wonderful. Let's welcome them, because they're leaving because their homes have been devastated by environmental disasters and there's led to political instability. Anyway, I mean, we are in such a world of hurt. When I hear about, oh, well, we'll join a coalition and do some education and we'll recycle more, to me, I worry that deflects from the crisis.
That's really appreciate that comment. Just because that's like a very resonant comment in general. Like it's something like I feel both professionally and personally. So there's a few thoughts that I have about that. One is it's really important to focus on what are the things that I have direct control over. Where can I make the most immediate difference? So one is, well, the walls of my home, the organizations I'm a part of. So there's a place that I can take action, and taking concrete action builds a sense of hope, empowerment, and forward momentum, right? So being able to actually say, like, we've done X, Y, Z things and actually inspire others, because moving out of that overwhelm and paralysis is really it's a daily thing. And like I opened with, our brains are not equipped to do that. So to feel empowered, that's one. The other is one of the reasons why we wanted to build a broader coalition, than because we've had other programs where we focused on just your synagogue and the few projects that you're going to create. And what we're really trying to do here is amplify the collective Jewish community. So by building out I'll call it a strategic plan, just to kind of change the wording and the focus of it. One part is to talk about the greenhouse gas emissions that we're producing, and the other is to actually make a plan and talk about what are the ways we're going to actually impact the world beyond our institution. And that's where we start slotting in a lot of the advocacy work that you're talking about. So we're really trying to create a structure where we get to do both parallel at the same time, that we're doing our part to reduce what we're contributing, but then also putting plans in place so iterative time, we actually can make a contribution. The last thing I'll say is we did a lot of thinking on what is Hazon as an organization best positioned to support people with. And there are others that we're partnering with, like Dayenu, like Jewish Earth Alliance, that are far more equipped, and they're really good at really pushing advocacy and supporting that. So what we're doing is trying to bring our network, anyone that we could touch, to both look at their greenhouse gas emissions and then partner with these other organizations that are so good at doing all of that work. Because it is a time where we need to throw the kitchen sink at it, but we also have to like take care of ourselves and do it like one step at a time and like really feel empowered. There's a quote that it's like I feel like it's a cultural aphorism. I don't know if there's a source for it, but that we often overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year, but underestimate what we could do in 10 years. So we do need to throw the kitchen sink at it, but probably if we plan it out in a 7 to 10 year timeline, we actually can successfully do that as an organization.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I just saw a question in
I
the
see.
chat.
Right. I see Elaine and Hubie. Go ahead, and then we'll come back to the chat.
Okay,
Well,
sure.
on this thing about how effective we can be, I think that this is an absolutely necessary step, just so that we can at least maybe go to sleep at night and know that we're trying to do the right thing. But in reality is we've traveled a lot, and go through South America. They are so far behind. In other words, you have a booming population, and you go on a road trip, and you find people as soon as you get out of a village, the garbage is dumped all over the streets. I mean, it's just they're not even thinking about this effect, because their first problem is, how do I get rid of the garbage I've got? And we have to do this. I agree, but I'm not too hopeful for the world, to be honest with you.
So the piece I want to highlight is this is a very live conversation on Hazon, is the impact on the coming generation. Because inevitably, they're going to be inheriting a world that is more challenged. And what is the responsibility and action that we could take to both avert the crisis, but also for them to feel like we were well taken care of, right? Like, people were doing their best to leave a world and to actually empower them to participate in that. So one of the really powerful things, because this is kind of such a big thing, is to look at what's happening in my backyard and how can I kind of clean my side of the street, and then work with wherever I can to do it elsewhere. Because we're in a developed country, our impact is no small part. We are a small part of the American population, but relative to the impact that American lifestyles have on the globe environmentally, our impact as a Jewish community is very large. Yeah.
How do you quantify the impact of the reduction in agricultural food production? I don't know that that's true, with large solar farm development.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the study that you're referring to. It's not a conflict I'm particularly aware of. I mean, that we could get into a conversation. We actually have someone on staff that our director of food and climate that's far more well versed in the world of food. But I don't think actually land area is an issue. We have a lot of wasted resources in the amount of corn that we produce and the amount of commodity crops we produce. So I'm not terribly worried about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Michael has said
and
drought.
I don't know about this false alarm, but again, our starting point is the climate crisis is an urgent, real issue, and that's just kind of the communities we're working with. That's the starting point. We're not really putting a lot of energy in trying to figure out how to convince people that this is a big issue to deal with.
Michael said drought will have more impact than solar, and I totally, completely agree with that. Jay asked how much farmland is dedicated to ethanol production for gas-powered cars.
So again, that's like an area I'm just not specialized in, but one of the things we're advocating, because there's actually a lot of pathways to zero greenhouse gas emissions, but one of the methods is to electrify everything, right? So electrify everything and then clean up the grid. Because something like the grid, once we do the advocacy necessary, kind of back to your point, Michael, like there's so many big issues that are way bigger than us, like where our grids get their energy from. That does take time. But if we're in a position that all of our work is already electrified, so when we finally flip that switch, all of a sudden there's an exponential drop in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one of the reasons why we're actually less focused on something like ethanol powered cars, to say over time, when it makes sense, switch to electric, because ultimately all of our grids will be switching to that direction, but we need to be prepared for that when it happens.
Yeah. I know that there was a noticeable drop in greenhouse emissions during COVID because we weren't driving, we weren't traveling, people were just staying put. Bob Benton, who is not on today, but he is in local government. And I said, why aren't there more chargers at our downtown train station for commuters who go into the city? They're gonna have to charge their electric cars. And it's complicated. It's expensive to put in the chargers. That's revenue for the city. Nothing is, there's a lot of gray in all of these areas. There's nothing that's black and white. Oh, put in, 100 electric chargers. So I think those are all things that as we move forward, I'd like to see an electric charger at Macomb Soleil Lakeside. But again, our parking lot needs repaving. It's one thing or another. So what other?
That's a really great comment. And that's one of the things that I found really helpful to think about our work in terms of planning rather than doing all the action now, because installing electric chargers, really important, helpful project. And there's all kinds of challenges that come to the way. So if it's actually on our board radars, our strategic goals, then it actually becomes something like, we want to get there. How do we clear these out of the way, but it consistently stays on our radar over time. Yeah.
Other questions? Anything else? You said at the beginning that you're working with day schools and, obviously those are big institutions. Are you doing anything with Jewish camp? And tell us a little bit more of how you, we can talk to us as a, one synagogue and, there's 30 individuals, but, tell us what you're doing with some of the bigger Jewish organizations.
Sure. So we have at this point, at least as of Friday, we have about 120 organizations signed up. Oh, yes. Actually, let me put the website in the chat before I forget. Thank you, Michael.
Great.
Zone.
I think I put it in before, but yeah.
Yeah,
put it
well,
in
and
again.
this is the direct link to that specific web page. And I'll
Great.
also put my email address in for
Perfect.
you all to follow up if you like. Normally I'd say, if you want more information, go to an info session, but I've pretty much given you what's there. So we're working with day schools, we're working with Jewish camps, we're working with Hillels, Jewish social service organizations. And what I find really fascinating is I was just listening to a presentation about someone talking about how Hurricane Katrina so deeply impacted their work. And there was a quote that they said is, no one has it in their budget to be reactive to a major disaster.
Mhm.
It doesn't exist in our budgets, right? Yet, at least for Jewish social service organizations, like they have to. All of a sudden, you have people that need homes, need more mental health care, whatever that is. So it's like on the one hand, it's like we don't have the budget or the time or the resources to plan for it, but when crises do happen, we definitely don't have the budget to respond to it, and some have to go into a deficit to figure that out. So some of those organizations, it's like changing the way they're thinking about delivering their work. Another area that we're really helping to think about, and I probably should have asked this ahead of time, is when we're looking to make major new investments or renovations and construction. So like I mentioned about my synagogue doing the HVAC unit, that HVAC unit is probably 50 plus years old. And when I buy a new one, I'm now baking in greenhouse gas emissions for my children and grandchildren probably. So like if that's something that we're planning on doing, and so what we're doing is we're organizations starting to think about ahead of time, oh wow, we are doing that. How can we do it? And for organizations that have big buildings like JCCs or camps always have like very unique facilities, they do that. The programming side of the coalition hasn't launched, so we haven't formally convened the communities of practice yet. We're still receiving. By far, the synagogues are the most well represented of the area. I would say it's somewhere between like a third and a quarter of our membership is currently synagogues, and there's representation, but the most is from the Reform, the conservative world, as kind of some of the larger constituencies. So there'll be a lot of interesting support and conversation there. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that my camp has the Reform Camp, Owen Singer Reunion Institute. We have 1,000 kids over the summer. We do compost, which is not easy with, 10, 11, 12-year-olds of what to compost and what to throw away. But people have water bottles. We do not have plastic water bottles. And so those are, we're trying to make itsy bitsy steps. And as each building is redone, it's absolutely, more, it's better for the environment.
Yeah.
We have another, if we reach zero emissions, what do you expect the climate will be doing? We have always had hurricanes, and even Noah had a global flood.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll reiterate that kind of our starting point is that the climate crisis is real and it's affecting our climates and making our once in a century storms and challenges more frequent, our wildfires more intense, our droughts more frequent and severe. So that's just kind of the starting point. That we're trying to avert the worst case scenarios and actually get ourselves to a more habitable Earth, both for our children and grandchildren, but also for all creatures.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to do, since we have a few more minutes, is I was talking about kind of these longer timescales to change our thinking from 1 year timescales to a broader range. And I mentioned the Shemitah year earlier. I want to leave you with a short teaching about Shemitah that I think works really well for even something like strategic planning. So I'd love to share that briefly to maybe close us out, that you could take.
That'd be
away,
great.
please. I'm going to share my screen again. Do you see the quotes?
We do.
Great. So these are two quotes that are related to Shemitah. One is from Exodus. So 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield, but in the seventh you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave, let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. So this is the first place that this idea of Shemitah, this 7 year rest, comes up in the Torah. It also is reiterated again later in Leviticus. I just didn't put it up here. It's said slightly different, but it communicates the same general idea. That there is this cycle of every 7 years, we're going to stop planting our fields and letting the land rest. If this was a Shemitah session, we'd really pull it out. But one of the impacts of that is, especially in the biblical economy, our entire society stops for a full year. Like the entire economy stops. We stop doing work because it all grinds to a halt. This is a big change. It's a major marker in time that comes every 7 years. It's as if once the Shemitah year ends, I have to now start planning for the next 6 years of how am I going to take care of myself, my family, and community for the 7th year coming. So there's these regular intervals. And then again, later we have it mentioned in Leviticus, you shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. So 7 of these 7 year Shemitah cycles. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month on the 10th day of the month, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. You shall have the horn sounded through your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all of your inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee, or yovel is the Hebrew word. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you shall return to your family. So there's this cycle above it that every 49 or 50 years is actually unclear. We have this like supercharged Shemitah year where slaves are released. Land actually reverts back to its original owners. There's like this very temporary ownership of land. But I'm highlighting because there's this really interesting dynamic in the Jewish calendar where weekly, our whole week leads up to Shabbat, and we're planning for that. And then it kind of, that's a microcosm of this bigger cycle of every 6 years leads to this big Shabbat for a year, every 7. And then every 7 of those leads to this like societal change. So this idea of looking forward, that we need to recalibrate and reset and actually think in bigger timescales than just the next Shabbat or even the next year, is very deeply baked into our tradition. It's also one of the most historically challenging parts of our tradition that people have enacted, but it's something we've had to grapple with. Actually, all the more so now that we live in the land of Israel again, that there's Jewish sovereignty there. They actually have to think about what happens there. But this idea that we have to do big things in the next 7 to 10 years is something that at least the Torah feels is not only possible, but actually very much a part of Jewish practice. That we're expected to like change and recalibrate each 7 years. So we have a few more minutes, but I want to leave you all that teaching that this idea of shifting ourselves these 7 year time frames is pretty well grounded in Jewish tradition.
Yeah, I think that making strategic plans, looking ahead to the future, that obviously you can change everything all at once, and you have to put in your budget, enough money so that maybe in 7 years, if we have to redo the roof, Jay, we can have solar panels. And that if we say, and I totally believe this, if we say that we believe in lessening our carbon footprint, and we believe in education, whatever, our budget should reflect that. And if we have to put that in our budget, it needs to go into the budget, because this is somebody, our kahila, our community feels very strongly about. That's what I would say. Any other questions? Because I do have a quick wrap up here. Is that
Well, it looks like Jay had a question.
Jay, go.
Yeah, I was
Jay.
just gonna make a quick announcement. Our Macomb Solel Lakeside Green Team, we have monthly meetings. Next one is November 7th at 6:30. So check your Macomb at Home emails with the link to join us on November 7th. We'd love to have more and more people.
Here. Bruce, I apologize. I don't know why somebody would put nonsense. We encourage open forum here, but anonymous graffiti while the speaker is talking, we do not encourage. And obviously everyone who is here thinks this is very, very important. I do want to tell everyone that next week, and I'm going to share my screen, is this is the story of the suitcase. And I'm sorry. I want to tell you a little bit more about it. Jim Schuster couldn't stay on. And first of all, we're in person next week, so we'll have lox and bagels. It's based on the Holocaust as the anniversary of Kristallnacht, was the first week in November. It's a rare piece of performance art, unlike anything most of us have seen. It's a live one-man show that will be an entire string ensemble telling his family story and original compositions created and performed by Tim Lorsch. We will not be able to record it. It will be streamed and in person. So I encourage you to come out next week and continue with reducing your carbon footprint, and don't use those one-use plastics. And anyone else, I'll go to gallery here. Anyone else has a question, you can let me know. And it's great seeing you. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
Yeah, everyone's
Have a great
clapping.
day.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.